Welcome back. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. 2 weeks before the World Cup starts, Qatar's foreign minister has told us that criticism over the country's treatment of migrant workers and LGBT plus rights had a sense of arrogance. Rishi Sunak has arrived in Egypt to attend COP27, where the issue of compensating vulnerable countries for the damage of climate change will be discussed for the first time. And the Prime Minister is facing questions here over his appointment of Sir Gavin Williamson to the Cabinet after he sent abusive messages to the Conservative former Chief Whip. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the economics correspondent at The Spectator, Kate Andrews, and the political editor of the Daily Mirror, John Stevens. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Telegraph leads with a report that Britain has opened the door to paying climate change reparations to developing countries by supporting talks on the issue at COP27. The US, UK, Canada and Australia have fallen billions of dollars short of their fair share of climate funding for developing countries, that report in The Guardian. The front of the Express says senior Conservatives urged Rishi Sunak to stick to the pensions triple lock as a matter of principle. On the front of the Times, there's a report that billions of pounds of government spending in Britain is being classified as foreign aid as ministers grapple with the small boats crisis and war in Ukraine. The Metro reports that a boy has died as fireworks were launched down the street. Their headline, Bonfire Night of Mayhem. According to The Sun, the Prime Minister has hit out at MP Matt Hancock for going on TV show I'm a Celebrity. And the Daily Star also has a story about Matt Hancock and his appearance on the reality show. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Kate Andrews and John Stevens. Good evening to you both. Welcome. Let's start with the Telegraph, the front page of the Telegraph, and Rishi Sunak at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. He has now arrived. What do you think he has on his to-do list, Kate?
Well, he's going to want to recommit to the pledges made at COP26, which was, from Boris Johnson's perspective, and of course, Rishi Sunak was a main character, a key player in Boris Johnson's cabinet, a very big moment for the UK. And he's going to want to make sure that he doubles down on the commitments that he made during the leadership campaign to achieving those net zero targets. But what's interesting on the front page of the Telegraph is that something that Ed Miliband was calling for this morning on the Sunday news round, which a lot of people were saying, well, that's a bit radical. Rishi Sunak is going to engage with at COP26. And that is mainly Pakistan's call for reparations for countries that are suffering from damages due to climate change already. Countries like Bangladesh and the Maldives are looking for compensation. Now, this is very, very early days, and Rishi Sunak has agreed to take part in last-minute conversations about reparations, but by no means is committing to anything. And given another story we're going to talk about this evening on the front page of The Guardian, it's very easy to say in theory that you're going to provide these kinds of funds. It's very different in practice. So we're not far down this road. But interesting, once again, the Labour Party is calling for more spending, something we've seen over the past couple of months. The Conservative Party starts by saying, no, that's ridiculous, and then ends up in discussion or actually implementing the policy.
Reparations being on the agenda, though, certainly, and the paper's saying that Number 10 could be forced to pay out to poorer countries hit by global warming disasters. John?
I don't think they're going to be forced to do it. I think quite clearly, as we know, at a lot of these summits, lots of things get promised and they don't necessarily end up happening. We saw that at COP26. We know that some of the things that were promised back then haven't actually happened in the last 12 months. But you can see why a lot of these countries are unhappy. They feel that they are due some money from countries that have got very wealthy from using carbon emissions that, countries that have managed to become very developed, they've done very well out of creating all of these emissions. And then there are lots of places in the world which are less developed, which are struggling with the consequences. I think in reality, rather than just seeing this as reparations money going from rich countries to poor countries to kind of pay off the debt of the things they've done in the past, what you're more likely going to see is the UK committing to do more to help these countries adjust to climate change. So doing things, places like the Maldives, how can they cope with flooding? We know that Pakistan, a third of the country, was underwater because of floods earlier this year. We know the UK already gives a lot of aid money to Pakistan. Could some of that be used to look at how communities can cope with changes in climate change? And another way that we spend money already at the moment is helping countries transition from using kind of dirty old fuels at the moment into bringing in more cleaner, green solutions. So we obviously have changed in this country to using a lot of wind power, things like solar. And so that's one of the ways that we already spend money, is helping countries that are already polluting a lot at the moment, moving towards greener solutions. So I think that's probably more likely, rather than us just kind of saying, oh no, we're very sorry for what we've done in the past and giving over a big check to some of these countries.
But Kate, the Guardian tells us that the US, UK, Canada and Australia have fallen billions of dollars short of their fair share of climate funding for developing countries. This comes in a new assessment by a report entitled Carbon Brief. And we find out that rich countries pledged to provide $100 billion US, that's 88 billion pounds a year by 2020. And this target has been missed.
So this is a really good example of how, making lofty promises does not always pan out in actual policy, or to put it even more bluntly, cash being dished out where it's supposed to go. So the so-called Fair Share Climate Fund for developing countries, which is supposed to be helping them with this transition, the money that's supposed to be put into it by the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia has not been met. Now, it should be noted that the UK has come quite close to doing so, but it still fell $1.4 billion short, not a small chunk of change. And it has missed this deadline that it was supposed to reach 2 years ago. So, I've actually been speaking to quite a few climate activists who are very excited about COP26, who are either at COP27 and feeling a bit dispirited, or decided not to go at all. And I think there's a growing sense that, when you actually put the facts in front of these world leaders, and when you actually explain what has or has not been met, it gets a little bit more uncomfortable, and that it's all good and well to get people together to discuss all of their dreams and hopes and ambitions for the future. But if we're not actually delivering on the promises that we've already made and the commitments we were supposed to reach several years ago, it means that people aren't going to be especially excited or optimistic about what can be achieved in the future. And so I think there's going to be real pressure on at COP27 to show how leaders and countries are actually going to commit to what they've already promised, let alone the new promises that might be made there.
Onto the Express, and talking about the triple lock, that senior Tories are urging the Prime Minister to stick to the promises made on the triple lock for pensions, the pledge.
Yeah,
John.
So this is something the Tories promised in their 2019 election manifesto. What the triple lock means is that pensions increase, the state pension increases every year, and it goes up either by inflation, average earnings, or 2.5%, whichever of those three figures is the highest. And this is something that the Tories have been saying that they are considering dropping. It's kind of been an on-off thing over the last few weeks. There was one point where Liz Truss said that she was thinking of getting rid of it, and then she said she was going to do it. And then we had Rishi Sunak come in, and he said that he's thinking about getting rid of it. And it is just one of these other things that we're waiting now for the autumn statement on November the 17th to see if the government do stick to their promise or not. And we know that there's a massive black hole in the country's finances. We can have a discussion about why that is and whether a lot of that is due to Liz Truss. But I think this is going to be really hard for the government if they start ripping up things that they were quite clear in their pledges to people at the last election they were going to do. If they step away from them now, I think that would be tricky if they go into the next general election. People will say, well, how can we trust anything you say when you haven't been able to deliver lots of things in your last manifesto? And this is really going to be tricky for the government if they do actually go ahead and get rid of it, because we know that pensioners are some of the people who are most likely to vote. A lot of those people do go out to polling stations and have their stay. And I think if they feel that they've been betrayed by the government, that they got promised one thing and then they didn't actually end up doing it, then a lot of these people might think, well, hang on a minute, why would I vote for them? Maybe I'll just stay at home.
Yeah, the article is warning that 3 Conservative ex-ministers are fearing that the party risks losing its vital grey vote. Kate.
Well, John summed up the politics there brilliantly, that if you break a manifesto promise, it's very difficult to go back to voters and say, I promise to keep my word. And of course, the people that this is going to affect are, not all, of course, but primarily where the Tory party is looking for to get their votes to win elections. The difficulty about the triple lock is that it's very expensive and it contributes to intergenerational unfairness. And actually, after the financial crash and throughout the 2010s, you saw the state pension go up faster sometimes than wages were. So there was a sense that pensioners were better off during that difficult time. Now, of course, if it doesn't rise with inflation, the opposite argument will be made. But it's a very expensive policy. And whilst roughly 20% of pensioners are thought to be on the poverty line and they're vulnerable and they absolutely need the support, closer to 30% of pensioners are thought to be in millionaire households. And so I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that this blanket subsidy is not necessarily the right one, because we are topping up people who really don't need the money and perhaps not giving enough attention to those who really do need the support.
It'll be very interesting to see whether the triple lock is kept or not. Kate and John, for the moment, thank you. We are going to take a break. Coming up, the PM stands by Sir Gavin Williamson despite his rude WhatsApp messages. More on that when we come back. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, the economics correspondent at The Spectator, Kate Andrews, and the political editor of the Daily Mirror, John Stevens. Let us have a look at the Metro now. And this piece looking at the fact that the Prime Minister is continuing thus far to back Sir Gavin Williamson. John.
Yeah, this is a really tricky one for Rishi Sunak. So some text messages has come out, or I think they're actually WhatsApp messages, that were exchanged between Gavin Williamson and Wendy Morton, who was the chief whip under Liz Truss. And Gavin Williamson seems to have really taken issue with the fact that he wasn't invited to go to the Queen's funeral, sent a barrage of messages to Wendy Morton, some of them slightly sweary, some of them seeming slightly threatening to her. And we find out now that Rishi Sunak was made aware of this before he did his reshuffle when he became Prime Minister. Jake Berry, who had been chair of the Tory party, warned Rishi Sunak that there had been a complaint about these messages, that CCHQ, which is the Tory head office, were looking into Gavin Williamson. And he went ahead anyway and appointed him to a role in government, and he attends cabinet. Although his role in cabinet is slightly mysterious. He's a minister without portfolio. When you ask Number 10 what on earth that means, what are his responsibilities, they're not really able to tell you what he's doing. And I think coming off the back of the row we had last week with the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and questions over why on earth he'd made her Home Secretary after she'd been sacked just 6 days earlier, I think it just raises questions about Rishi Sunak's judgment and why on earth did he pick these people when he put them in the cabinet. We know that Gavin Williamson was sacked under Theresa May because he was accused of leaking national security stuff. We know under Boris Johnson, he got rid of him after he seemed to make a bodge of exams during COVID. So just seems really surprising that Rishi Sunak felt he had to try him for a third time, and surprise, surprise, it seems to be going wrong.
Kate, do you agree that this calls into question the Prime Minister's judgment?
I think it's more a reminder that this government, this cabinet in particular, are bits and bobs of the Tory party being meshed together in order to bring together what is increasingly a fractured party. Gavin Williamson has a long-term reputation of being the wheeler and dealer behind the scenes. He played a very large role in getting MPs over the line when Boris Johnson ran for leader in 2019. And he is a faction of the Tory party that Rishi Sunak has to keep on side. There's no doubt that the messages are aggressive. And I think from everything we know about Rishi Sunak and the way that he presents himself and usually communicates, this is a tricky situation for him. It's telling that Oliver Dowden has come out and said, the cabinet secretary has come out and said, look, he was aware that there was some disgruntlement with the former chief whip, and Gavin Williamson was one of those MPs. Rishi Sunak's clearly trying to keep as much distance as he can from this, but it is just a reminder between Gavin Williamson and Suella Braverman that Rishi Sunak had to make some compromises in order to be in the position he's in now. This was not his dream cabinet. It's the one he had to put together to try to, get things working again and to try to tackle the huge economic crisis ahead of us.
Let's finally finish off with the Sun, and these are claims that the Prime Minister is none too pleased with Matt Hancock and his appearance in the jungle. John.
Yeah, I just think the complete contrast on these two stories, Gavin Williamson and Matt Hancock. One of them's off in the jungle. I think a lot of people are mad about that, particularly voters in his constituency. But Rishi Sunak feels able to mouth off on this and say, oh, isn't it awful what he's doing? He's not serving his constituents, rah, 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 rah. Mm-hmm. But yet on the issue of Gavin Williamson, we've not really heard anything from Rishi Sunak at all. And I think you look at the two sins that, I'm no big fan of what Matt Hancock's doing in the jungle. I think it is appalling to be doing that while Parliament is sitting. But you compare that with what Gavin Williamson's accused of, and he's not only not criticising Gavin Williamson, he's still got him in his cabinet.
Kate, your thoughts in 20 seconds?
I think at this moment, we need all MPs to show up to work. We have some really difficult times ahead. The Bank of England just forecast a 2-year recession, and I think the Prime Minister is quite right to take aim at somebody who's flying off to the Australian jungle to go on reality TV.
Kate and John, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the next hour. Thank you.